afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the Swedish solar market. My name is Dee. I am the project manager at Solarplaza. You can see my little face over there, and I will be moderating this webinar today. So at Solarplaza, we specialize in organizing solar conferences for attendees to share knowledge and to network. I would say we're quite good at it. And some quick practical notes. So this is one of the webinars that we do. If you have any questions, if you look at your screen, at the bottom, there is a question box. It has a little chat box and a question mark. Any questions that you have, please send them our way and I will make sure to ask them. Any technical issues, you can also use the question box. We will get back to you. We have a great technical person here named Bo who will help. And the webinar slides and the full recordings will be available in 1 or 2 days. So you will definitely get it and you will get an email about that too. All right, so this is the agenda right now and the outline that we'll be doing. I am currently doing the introduction, and the goal of this webinar is to give you a quick snapshot of the Swedish solar market to kind of look at the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead in this rapidly evolving landscape. So we're here to dissect the surge in large-scale solar installations, as well as to understand the barriers to this growth, and for example, like the complex and slow permitting procedures. And this webinar is the lead up to our solar conference that will be happening on the 21st of March in Sweden. So with all this in mind, who better to provide all this knowledge than our speakers today? So we will start with Amelia Westerberg. She is the Swedish representative in the IEA PVPS Task 1, and she has been involved intensely in preparing the last 4 Swedish national survey reports to PVPS. She works at Becquerel, Sweden. And that's not all. She also leads a really cool double life as a sustainable influencer. And alongside her sister, she advocates for reducing environmental footprints through like food choices, fashion, travel, and she wrote a really nice cookbook as well. So we have a deeply committed individual to the energy and sustainable transition with multiple expertise and will give you some valuable insights. So without further ado, Amelia, you have the floor. Or I guess the webinar.
Thank you, Dee, for that introduction. I'm going to take control over my slides. Yeah, and while I do that, I can again say hello to everyone and repeat that my name is Amelia Westerberg. I'm a market analyst at Becquerel, Sweden, where I, among other commitments, represent Sweden in IEA-PVPS Task 1, as mentioned, and a lot of the content that I will present today stem from that role, so to say. And today I want to give you a brief snapshot or an introduction to the conference in March that he mentioned. And just to give you context, I would like briefly just to present the program. IEA-PVPS is the photovoltaic power system program, which is a collaborative initiative under the International Energy Agency with the aim to advance global collaboration and also to expedite the development and the widespread adoption of photovoltaic energy and position it as the substantial and sustainable renewable option that it is. And Task 1 has 27 member countries and a lot of different tasks. But Task 1, where I work, is focused on strategic PD market analysis and outreach. And looking at the total installed PV capacity in Sweden, we can see that we have experienced a close to exponential growth in the past decade, but starting from quite a low level in the beginning of the 2010s. The market development for the past few years has been around 50% year-on-year growth, and while the public figures are not out for 2023 yet, so we can merely estimate the added capacities. We expect around the same capacity additions this year, with 50% growth compared to last year, adding up to around 1.2 gigawatt of added capacity. But as said, that is an estimate. As many countries that are stepping away from market-wide subsidies. We are losing quite a lot of data that we earlier years could use for detailed market segmentation. So as you can see for 2022, and we'll see for 2023 once the official figures are out, we cannot do the same level of market segmentation. But what we can say confidently is that the Swedish market, as of now, is still predominantly made up out of distributed PV systems, so systems primarily installed for self-consumption. And these green shares here represent the centralized market segment, so the PV parks. And as you can see, they are slowly gaining market shares in the overall market. We do anticipate significant acceleration in the coming years in this segment. A few drivers for that is the um, can I just make sure that you still hear me? I get a message here that there are some disturbance.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just a
Yeah,
bit of
great.
background noise, I think, but we hear you quite clearly.
All right. I'll turn off my camera if, in case it is my internet connection that is causing the lag. In any case, as I said, the centralized PV segment is anticipated to grow substantially, driven by the electrification of the transportation and the industry sector in Sweden, and also new establishment of new energy-intensive industries. Um, we are also seeing many large-scale power plants generally in Sweden approaching the end of their technical lifespan. And also, of course, as on many markets, the increased volatility and general electricity and energy prices, enhancing the attractiveness from controlling your own assets, owning them, or engaging in power purchase agreements due to this unpredictability on the market. And beyond, the financial considerations of PV parks, there is also a compelling commercial value associated with PV parks in Sweden, where we can see most of the larger parks being closely linked to market actors such as banks, wholesalers, large companies, etc., and often even named after them to promote their sustainability efforts. And looking at the prices, I think this figure from the IA-PVPS program is good, showing the general development and also the price range in the two different market segments displayed here. And if we place the Swedish prices in this context, we can see that in terms of residential systems, Sweden falls quite low in terms of the price range globally. But if we look at the PV parks, we instead see us falling in the higher bracket in terms of prices. And that can be due to the comparatively small size of the actual PV parks, which of course reflects the price per watt, but also the small size of the market itself. So I think this is a good representation of the maturity of these respective segments in Sweden. And if we stay on the topic of the distributed market segments, there is also a clear divide between small and large distributed systems in Sweden, and especially comparatively small sectors of large commercial and industrial segments on the Swedish PV market compared to other markets in Europe, for example, in the same size. And this is closely linked to our rules around energy tax of self-consumed electricity, where we have an upper limit of 500 kilowatt systems that are allowed to self-consume electricity, so to consume your own produced electricity without having to pay energy tax. And as I said, this limits the size of systems installed with this business model. And since Sweden is a distributed market predominantly, this is the leading business model. And as you can see in this figure, it also makes Sweden quite unique in this approach compared to our neighbors and other EU countries. The similar regulations exist in Finland and France, but they are not as limiting as the Swedish example. And if we move over to the policy overview for Sweden, I would just like to start by mentioning the we're some, you could say, support systems that has affected the Swedish PV market, but that it has currently expired. So for systems that were installed before 2020-2021, we had a capital subsidy program that went on for around a decade, which its finest form gave up to 30% of the total capital expenditure back on your investment, which had a huge impact on the early and also late deployment of PV throughout its lifetime of this system. However, there was a cap of 1.2 million Swedish crowns per system, which could receive this support, which resulted in a lower percentage or share of support for large-scale PV, which is also a contributing factor to the market segmentation that we see on the Swedish market. And then we also have the Green Electricity Certificate Program, which is a green certificate program for the production of renewable electricity. That's still a lot of PV systems in operation in Sweden is getting remuneration from. And I wouldn't say that this electricity certificate system really had an impact on deployment, but it did, as said, created some revenues for PV systems. If we look at the new distributed PV in Sweden, there are some support or subsidies. As I said, self-consumption is allowed for systems smaller than 500 kilowatt peaks. And then there is also another CAPEX support scheme that takes form of a tax deduction for green technology. And this means that residential PV systems owners get 20% back on their upfront cost for installing PV as a deduction on their tax at the end of the year. Then there's also a tax credit for micro producers of renewable electricity, which is in international term would be rather explained as a feed-in premium, which gives owners of smaller commercial or residential systems 0.6 Swedish crowns for the per kilowatt hour fed into the grid. So it gives remuneration for the excess electricity that is fed into the grid. And then in brackets here, I have put the guarantees of origin and grid benefit compensation. These are two schemes that are given to distributed PV, but are not really driving deployment, but if they are adding some extra revenue. And then, however, for PV parks in Sweden, they primarily function in a non-subsidized market. There are several different ways to finance PV parks in Sweden, but there are no auctions or tenders or similar, and they're often managed through PPAs. And you could benefit from guarantees of origin again, but it's not really driving deployment. And with the few last minutes I have left, I would like to tickle some thoughts in preparation of the conference and name some of the challenges and opportunities going forward for the Swedish PV market. And what we saw during 2022 and into 2023 is that the high energy prices, or high electricity prices rather, really spiked interest in especially residential PV, or especially in 2022 after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we saw many owners of PV getting quicker returns of their investment, and installers really fighting to keep up with the demand. And this, as I said, spilled over a little bit into 2023. And another relevant development for 2023 and onwards is really as the year where distributed storage entered the Swedish market full scale, and home owners, it became really popular to couple your PV installation with a battery storage. However, a little gray cloud on the sky here is that one of the driving forces, or probably the main driving force for this interest, is that the green tax deduction that I mentioned, that gives 20% back on the return, back on your investment in PV, is also eligible for batteries, and the support limit there is 50%. However, the Swedish tax agency now the past weeks has made a clarification on their criteria for giving out this support, And one criteria that has been clarified is that you can only use your battery to store your produced electricity, so to increase um, the utilization grade on your PV installation, which hinders these homeowners and future users of the system to engage in flexibility and ancillary services. So that will likely affect this market, and we will see how in the future. Then, as another opportunity or is the low hardware prices that we have seen generally in Europe and in the world in the past year or half a year or so, which of course have helping with deployment, and also a general high social acceptance in Sweden for PV. Solar PV is again and again voted as surveyed rather as the most popular energy source in Sweden amongst the general public, and with the lowest direct opposition. However, in terms of challenges, the Swedish economy is one of the hardest affected by the economical crisis, you could say, and the high inflation and the high interest rates, which is decreasing the willingness to invest in PV and increasing the risk and cost of the capital for those who do. We also see long processing or permitting times and grid connections remaining a bottleneck, and the sector is requesting, if not else, higher transparency in where the grid capacity is and how the processing or the process of the permitting is happening, and to streamline the process also on the in the local counties on how national interests such as the use of agricultural land and the production of renewable electricity are to be balanced, because in Sweden there is quite a lot of privately owned agricultural land that could be relevant for PV that is currently not being used. But these things are really creating a huge project pipeline awaiting different kinds of permits, may it be for land use or grid connections. And lastly, there is generally quite a low interest for PV in the Swedish politics. PV is not really taking any large part of the general energy or electricity debate, and is generally also being underestimated in the national scenarios, which is not helping these processes that may need some political or regulatory attention. So this was a brief overview and some quick food for thought for the conference, and it was quite untactical for me to end on a negative note with the challenges, but I hope that the general takeaway from my presentation is, of course, positive and on the topic, as Dee mentioned, of the rapid acceleration of the Swedish PV market. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. And I would say that I wouldn't say it was very negative. I think it painted a really good picture, and I'm sure that we'll find ways at least to overcome the challenges. So thank you. I would like, yeah. So I would like to welcome our next speaker, Dan-Eric Archer. So we're really excited to involve him here. He's the powerhouse behind CheckWatt. And since 2017, Dan-Eric has steered the company on the journey to become a leading European flexibility aggregator. And they have the long-term vision to make flexibility reach its full potential by enabling it to permit faster deployment of RES and transport electrification by the reductions of bottlenecks in local grids. So one of the challenges that Amelia that you mentioned. But when he's not busy, revolutionizing the energy sector, then Eric indulges in endurance tour cycling, designing and building bicycle frames for his adventures. So it's clear here that there's a passion to really build something good and make sure that it can go the distance. So then Eric, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I'll do a quick flyover on the topic of flexibility in the grid, and with a little bit of focus on solar. Let's see if I can press the buttons to change slides. Yep. A little bit about us at CheckWatt first. We are a Swedish company with around 40 colleagues, and we are primarily an IT company, but an IT service provider for the renewable energy sector. Another word for this role that we have is called aggregator. Another word could be used is also a flexibility optimizer. So that there are a few different vocabularies out there, but these are the common ones. At the moment, we are aggregating a portfolio of these types of assets that you see: solar, wind turbines, EV charging facilities, and stationary battery systems. And the rapid growth right now is within stationary batteries in Sweden. There's a very interesting market situation. I'll mention more about it soon. So in order to explain a little bit about what the role of flexibility is in the energy system, I just want to define some of the roles in the system, illustrated in the picture here. So if we start from, let's say, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock and going clockwise, we have electricity retailers. And I think everybody knows what an electricity retailer is. That's where we buy the electricity. If we are a private consumer with a subscription to an electricity company. The electricity company is, or the electricity retailer is mostly just a front towards the clients. They don't need necessarily to have the technical roles of behind this. The next stakeholder or role is the DSO. So most of us know what the DSO does also. That's where we pay for our grid. The grid fees go there. The DSO needs to operate and build and repair the grid when it's needed. The next role is the TSO, and this might not be obvious to everybody, but the TSO is also an essential role. This is the stakeholder that assures that the transportation of electricity on a longer range is functional, and also between countries. And they are also responsible for the stability of the grid for the time frame, for the narrow time frame, which regular trading cannot handle. So in some countries, this is 15 minutes. In some countries, it is 60 minutes. So during this time, where there is no energy trading for on this detailed level. The next role is called BRP, and sometimes the BRP is the same company as the retailer, and the BRP is responsible for trading electricity, but also taking the responsibility for the amount of electricity to be traded, because electricity is a strange commodity. We have to trade it before how much we know how much we will actually need. So right now, or a couple of hours ago, most of the electricity for tomorrow was traded, even though we don't really know how much electricity we will consume tomorrow, and we don't even know how much electricity we will produce tomorrow. So both the production and the consumption are estimates. when we trade it. And of course, the estimates are never correct. So a large part of the BRP's business is to handle this difference between forecast and outcome, which is called imbalance. And lastly, we have asset owners who are owning any type of asset that can provide flexibility. And for us in CheckWatt, we handle the ones I mentioned before: batteries and solar and wind and charging of electric vehicles. Yeah, and then we work through partnerships, but that's not really important for this presentation here. So I will say a few words, a quick teaser on how the mechanism behind flexibility purchase, what is driving the value for flexibility for the TSO, the DSO, and also within trading. So I'll start with the TSO. Like I mentioned initially, we have a special interesting situation in Sweden where, for various reasons, there has been a bit of lack of assets providing these stabilizing services to our TSO, which results in a high price for these services. So that's why we have a situation now where very large investments in stationary batteries are happening in Sweden. There was on our one of the bigger tech newspapers had an article about it just the other week. There is a risk of a saturation on a short term, that maybe an oversupply when very many are building at the same time, but no one really knows. But I'll tell you briefly about the mechanisms of this. So the grid needs to maintain a certain frequency, 50 Hertz in Europe. And in order to do so, all the time there needs to be a certain volume of assets in megawatts on hold or in a readiness state for balancing any deviation, either in a higher or lower frequency than 50 Hertz, and in a different time frames. On a very quick time frame, in matter of actually milliseconds, and in longer time frames like minutes or even several minutes. These are called primary, secondary, and tertiary reserves, depending on their speed. So this is a hot market, like I said, in Sweden, so a lot of development in this field. And the reason for that is, one of the reasons is that the Nordic synchronous area is a pretty, well, not a very big area, and these countries, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and part of Denmark, is not so densely populated. So we are not so many people providing the system inertia in this region. In terms of population, the Nordic countries are smaller than Great Britain. So even though we are a larger area, we still have more grid instabilities in terms of size in production and consumption volume. As you see, the continental Europe is a very big synchronous area. So the dynamics of the market there is completely different from the Nordics. So the lighter grids like Ireland and Nordic are having higher value in general on these TSO services, frequency related ancillary services. UK had pretty good value there for a while, but I think the deployment of batteries there has stabilized, has made the market prices reduce there a bit already. Something else that could be mentioned is that it is not, well, I would say most parts of the world, these services are not open markets for private enterprises to bid into. But in Europe, there is such EU directives, and the harmonization is ongoing to make it make this the standard procedure all over Europe. But it is not fully there yet, as you see on this picture here. There are still many countries which are in the process of implementing markets where also private companies can participate. Yeah, the next topic I was going to mention as a flexibility value is on the a value that the DSO has or can create. So as you know, and as Amelia previously mentioned, grids and finding capacity in the grid is becoming a main event for anyone working in renewables in Europe and the world, I think. So it is capacity to connect production is becoming scarce, but also capacity to connect consumption, for example, charging capacity for EV along the major highways. And building grids is a slow process, and it's also expensive. And the flexibility of these aggregated assets can create value by either postponing grid reinforcement or in some cases replacing it so that there's no need of more grid at all. And this can be done in different ways. One way could be to have a market approach with local flexibility markets. Another way could be different types of bilateral agreements, or non-firm grid connections is a term used by some in European context. And the important part here is that the role of DSOs must change and is changing. So from being just a provider of the infrastructure, the DSO needs to actively work with flexibility as and be more of a operator and less of only a owner of infrastructure. And this needs legislation to create the right incentives, and this has reached very different levels of maturity in different countries. In Sweden, I would say we are still at the very early stages of this. We do have some local flexibility markets being tested. I would say they are still quite immature and not you can't really count on them as grid mitigation, grid cost mitigation yet, but it is a process of developing the right methods. There is also some bilateral agreements that are developing, but from a very immature level. Lastly, the flexibility from these assets, renewable energy and storage, can also create a value within the field of energy trading and this imbalance, the difference between forecast and outcome for production and consumption. So an example here is from Germany. We have there a spectacularly high price peak for 15 minutes the spring last year in April. So forecasts were for good wind and solar conditions, but weather forecasts are not fully reliable, as we all know, when we're planning our holidays and so. This will be an increasing problem or increasing event in all of the world as we go for more weather-dependent production. This is, of course, a problem for the consumers. It can create higher electricity prices in general when there are higher risks. Basically, insurance costs will increase for everybody if the BRPs needs to insure themselves against these unexpected peaks that can occur. The energy traders themselves are at risk for events like this. But it can be mitigated by buying flexibility on these BRPs, the balance of responsible parties. They can activate flexibility when there's a risk of this event occurring. So it will still be a cost, but it can be less than the cost of an actual event like this happening. And this is primarily, I would say, in Western Europe, like Northwestern Europe, primarily created by wind situation, is my feeling. And also in the Baltic states, where they have quite a lot of bottlenecks to the rest of the world in their grids. So Estonia, Latvia have had some events like this also. In Sweden, we don't have much of this yet, but I think it's just a matter of time before it becomes a bigger, a more normal occurrence. But I'm positive that energy storage and other forms of flexibility will help to mitigate these events and these costs for the general electricity sector. That was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dan-Eric. I would like to invite both you and Amelia, if you would like to turn on your cameras. We have some quick time for questions. I would say we have about time for 1 or 2 questions. And the first one I have to start out with is, I guess, it's the question of the webinar, right? Like, what will it take to unleash Sweden's solar PV potential? So based on your presentation and your expertise, which opportunity do you think would be the most promising to the solar market?
Well, from my perspective, co-location with storage is a great possibility. And well, I think many of the major large-scale sites being planned now, I think most of them do co-locate storage already, of those that are in planning phase. But also that the solar itself can be controlled. So we at CheckWatt, we do implement control of the solar PV. So, for example, during a negative price period, we can shut down the PV and also have the capability to ramp up quickly if needed by the grid frequency, for example.
Thank you. Amelia, did you have your perspective?
Sure, I can only back up what Dan-Eric is saying. I definitely agree. And to provide some additional input on the regulatory side, I think Sweden would benefit from a national strategy on PV and clearer targets on how to actually tackle these challenges around permitting and processing, as we see now, to really unleash the possibility to add larger capacities and more centralized PD. But we do see many of these challenges in other EU countries, so it's not specific to Sweden, but still I think it's important that our regulators and politicians see the potential of PV as well, and how it pairs with other renewable energy production and storage and flexibility, of course.
Thank you for your answers. That actually ties into our second question that we got. So someone was curious about if there were any specific projects that highlight the successful coupling of solar PV and distributed storage. If there was one, any particular really good success story that both of you were aware of?
Yeah, we have a few such, I think, that can be classified as very successful projects in operation. With storage, like I said earlier, the business case has been extremely good for a while. So those that have completed their commissioning, like the last couple of years, they have had good economy in the project.
Thank you. And I think, Amelia, do you have anything to add to Dan-Eric's answer?
Not really. I'm not aware of any specific business case that has been especially successful, but many, or if not most, of the developers in Sweden are looking into either adding storage to existing projects or including it in development.
Yeah, thank you. I believe she's a bit stuck, but that's okay then, Eric. There's one more question about you from your presentation, which is, are there any regulatory or market mechanisms in place to address the extreme pricing situations, like by the imbalances that you talked about?
Yeah, there is risk to be technical then, but there is an ongoing process of ramping up the MFRR volume in Sweden. And this, I think, to some extent, this will be used for securing against imbalance costs. We will see, but I think the some MFRR capacity will be affected by the risk of the price level there will be affected by imbalance risks when those weather conditions are uncertain in a way that will create high risks.
Thank you for your answer. And I think that just about wraps up our question time. So I'd like to thank you both, Dan-Eric and Amelia, for agreeing to join the webinar. Thank you very much. And if there were any more questions, you can email them or you can come look for them at our conference. So really quickly, as a thank you for joining the webinar, we have a discount code for if you would like to join the Sweden conference. It's on the screen right now if you'd like to take a look. And we have also a few more conferences in the lead up to Sweden, if these are any of the markets that you are interested in, of course. And yeah, finally, that's it for today. I would like to say thank you. Thank you once again, Dan-Eric and Amelia. I hope everyone has a good afternoon and you're a bit more smarter on the topics of the Swedish solar market. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Goodbye.